The Gorefield V2 mod just dropped, and it has a ton of lore and characters that we need to cover, starting with the first song called The Great Punishment. This scene is from the original animation created by Lumpy Touch, where we see John hiding from Gorefield, specifically after Gorefield murdered Odie. Technically, he didn't get a hold of the shotgun until later in the animation, but since this is an FNF mod, the scenes don't necessarily have to be one for one. What I like about this scene though is that John tries to shoot Garfield from behind the cover of the television, but as Gorefield says in his mod, bullets have no effect on him. And if you remember in the original, John literally shot Gorefield in the eye, and that didn't slow him down at all. Next we have a brief cutscene. Now we don't know why Boyfriend is here, but it becomes clear just by looking at his face that he doesn't know the trouble that he's stepped into, especially considering that Girlfriend isn't with him at this time. Now in Boyfriend's defense though, Gorefield does change back into his regular form, which is fairly harmless looking, but John's face should have gave Boyfriend a clue. But once Gorefield takes on his monster form, we see that Boyfriend realizes the trouble that he's actually in. Now this form is also from the original animation, specifically where Gorefield grabs John and demands lasagna. Something else that I like about this mod is that it states that Boyfriend has finite lives here, meaning that he doesn't have infinite lives. So if you mess up too many times, he will die, which actually helps highlight just how dangerous Gorefield is. Now at the end of this scene, we see that John pulls out a detonator and causes his house to blow up. Now it's never really explained how they could survive this, but I'm going to chalk it up to just pure luck. But in the next scene, we see Boyfriend battling Gorefield alone, and this is when we hear sirens in the background, which warn people that a bomb is about to drop. Basically, the government is getting involved, and they think that this is the only way to actually take out Gorefield. Now in the cutscene, we see that John is missing a hand, and that isn't from the blast, but rather from Gorefield biting it off. We don't get to see it in the mod, but in the original, Gorefield actually bites off John's hand when he's trying to set his house on fire in his basement. And he's doing this so that he can basically blow his house up. Now the reason that John and Boyfriend survived the nuke blast relatively unharmed is that Gorefield was actually able to absorb the blast that was around them, basically protecting them. And the scene where Gorefield is flying away with Boyfriend is from this part of the original animation. Now in the next scene, we see a character in the mod that is named Lyman, and he has a weird backstory, so I'll do my best to explain him. Now some of you may remember him from the old Garfield comic strips, and when I say old, I mean back in like 1978 when the comic was first being introduced. Lyman was actually the original owner of Odie and was created to be a friend that John could kind of vent to, but as the series went on, Garfield started taking that role more and more, meaning that John started talking to his cat as if it was a person, so over time, Lyman basically was just removed because there wasn't really any need for him. Now one of the issues arose when there wasn't any explanation to why he was removed, and this caused the internet to start making some wild theories for what happened to Lyman. One of the most dramatic was when people started saying that John actually locked Lyman in his basement to torment him and then take his life. There's actually a game called Garfield's Scary Scavenger Hunt that really helped make this idea take off. In the game, you find Lyman in the basement of this creepy looking house, and he's chained up and looks like he hasn't eaten or had anything to drink in days. The song in the mod called Captive is actually based on that game and the fan theory, which is why we see John pop up with lasagna in his hand and also a crazed look in his eyes. There are not many creepy stories with John as the bad guy, but they're always interesting when he is the evil person. Now with that being said, you may be wondering why this version of Lyman looks like he's going Super Saiyan and flying. The reason for this is that this version of Lyman is from the Lumpy Touch series, and in this series, it seems that the reason Lyman disappears is because he goes to some type of institution. And considering that he's locked up in some kind of straitjacket, I think it's safe to say that it was against his will. Now, as you can see in that cutscene, even though the Gorefield events hadn't happened yet, Lyman was still able to predict the future, predicting that the bullets wouldn't actually affect Gorefield, who would be taken out by Gorefield, and even the nuke coming down. This indicates that Lyman has some special abilities in this world, which is why he's able to fly, and he also looks so shredded. Now, the next scene shows him on his knees.
What do you mean by that?
And that is from this scene in the original animation. Lyman is able to survive the nuke by hiding in the pipes and basically vows to get revenge on Gorefield, because he blames himself for not being able to save everybody who passed away. This is also when we see him unlock his powers. The next character in the mod is called Lasagna Boy, aka John, and this character is actually from a game with the same name. John is basically a delivery boy, and he shows up to this creepy old house to deliver lasagna, but once he comes into the house, he's met by this Gorefield-like creature, which is what we see in the mod here. That is the only similarity that this game has with Gorefield besides the color of the game. The rest of the enemies are just random creatures and like a giant three-eyed demon. It seems like the creator meant to make a Gorefield game, but partway through he just started doing his own thing. And just to be clear, just because this character's name is John does not mean he's actually John Arbuckle. He's his own character. Now, the next character in the mod is Sansfield, and he's the main antagonist of the Undertale fan game called Bad Monday Simulator.
Boyfriend, I'm Skeleton Bros.
What the hell?
Normal, I'm versus Gorefield.
And I'm sure you can all tell that he's a combination between Garfield and Sans. And of course, there have been other Undertale's characters that have been replaced by Garfield characters. Some examples are Papyrus being replaced by Odie and Undying being replaced by Arlene. And I also think Norval is like the main character now. We also see Sansfield takes on 3 different forms in this mod, and all of those are from the original video game as well. Form 1 is basically what we see at the start of this mod. Phase 2 is when he falls to sleep in order to restore his HP, and once that happens, he moves on to Phase 3, which is this monstrous form. I would say it's definitely a game worth checking out if you enjoy Undertales at all. Now, the next character that we see in the mod is called Gorefield, and while he does make an appearance in some of the Bad Monday Simulator videos, the first time I saw him was in the Gorefield horoscope videos that were made like 3 or 4 years ago. Gorefield started out as a little cat named Garf that ended up going through a transformation that turned him into a snake-cat hybrid. And of course, once people saw him, they started to hunt him down so that they could take him out. After a really bad injury, Garf was laying on the ground basically waiting to die, but then the earth swallowed him up. And over many years, he started to slowly evolve, all the while sending little eyeballs up to the surface to see what the world was like. And once he was fully evolved into a new monstrous form, he decided that it was time for humanity to go. And not just for what they did to him, but for all the wars and the cruel things that humans do to each other. And even though Garf's true form looks like a monster, he took on the form of Gorefield so that he would look like a more heroic figure instead of a beast. But of course, we all know what he really looks like. The next character that we see is the cartoon cat, who is a giant creepy humanoid cat created by a Canadian artist named Trevor Henderson. And if he creeps you out, it's because he was made to. Trevor considers Cartoon Cat one of his most dangerous creations, and this is for a couple of reasons. Cartoon Cat can shapeshift, basically morphing his body any way it wants, meaning that it can elongate his body or shorten it as small as he needs to. And this is dangerous because if he's chasing you, there's pretty much no area or space that can keep him out. His abilities are very reminiscent to like a real life rat. And to make matters worse, he has the same ability as Black Cat's, meaning that he can give you persistent bad luck. The only saving grace is that it's kind of easy to avoid this character because he loves to actually hang out around old abandoned buildings and abandoned malls. Which, if we're being honest, you have no business hanging around those places anyway. Now, as for the people who have been captured in this mod, we see John, and the other person a lot of people think is GF, but I don't think that that's actually her. I think that person on the ground there is Luna Henderson, and I believe that she's like a animator. Another reason I think that this isn't girlfriend is because we see that boyfriend's head is on the pike there, and there is no way girlfriend wouldn't have tried to kill the cat if they had taken boyfriend out. At the very least, we would have saw her in her demonic form. Next, we run into Arlene, and she seems to be trapped in a basement. The whole scene with her is basically to get the player to find a few notes so that they can solve a puzzle to unlock a secret song. You will have to play through the mod yourself to get your code because it will be unique to you. And once you get through all that, you get to battle against Beaky the Clown, who used to appear in the Garfield's comic and also the TV show. He was originally created to be like a parody of a character called Bozo the Clown, and it seems like he trapped Arlene as a way to get boyfriend to battle with him. But there isn't much else to really say about this character. Next, we have the song called Take Me John, and this song is based on an animation by Jackademia, which shows Garfield feeling neglected because John is spending time with Liz. Garfield is basically getting jealous and begging John to spend time with him instead of Liz. A fun fact about this song's actual origin is that it's from a guy called J.W. Francis, and I don't think the original song had anything to do with John from Garfield, but I guess it just fit too perfectly for people not to use it for a Garfield animation. Next up, we have a song called Breaking the Cat, and it's based off a Lumpy Touch animation called Why Are You Running, Jesse? Basically, Walter made a potion that allowed him to mutate into a giant monster so that he could kill Hank, who also turned into like a giant worm-like creature. After taking Hank out, Walter went to Jesse's house so that they could cook. But to no one's surprise, Jesse is terrified of the monster that Walt has become and starts to run down the street. The song in the mod is pretty much a recreation, except that the monster is Gorefield instead of Walter. The next character in the mod is called Cryfield, and based on the cutscene, it seems like Garfield did something to upset John, so John yelled at him. This made Garfield pack up his stuff and leave the house, finding a box to live in. His girlfriend Arlene finds him and is trying to convince him to return home, and all the while, John has finally calmed down, so he hops into his car to look for Garfield. But there's a lightning storm going on during the time, and this causes John to slip off the road, which in turn makes Garfield feel even worse, because he feels like none of this would have happened if it wasn't for him in the first place. And this causes him to transform into Gorefield. And sadly, Garfield is so caught up in his own grief that if Arlene loses the rap battle, he will cut her into pieces, as we see in her game over screen. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this video where I go over the Gorefield horoscope lore. And make sure to let me know if you actually survive your Gorefield. With that being said, see you in the next video. Peace, peace.